Joining us now, MS Now's Fallon Gallagher, Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, and an MS Now contributor, and Dave Ehrenberg, former state attorney for Palm Beach County. Fallon, let's start with you. What else did we hear from Blanche? And I know we're still combing through this trove of documents.
Yeah, Ariel, we learned a significant amount of information during this press conference, but the biggest headline is that the Department of Justice believes that they have met their obligation and that their work is complete under the Epstein Transparency Act, that this new drop of 3 million documents is everything that they feel that they need to deliver. Now, there is one caveat. They said that there could be a small amount of documents that we could get. They are working with the Southern District of New York, asking a judge to unseal the grand jury material related to the 2019 investigation and eventual indictment against Ghislaine Maxwell. But there are a number of headlines here. The biggest thing is that Todd Blanche is saying that there is no super secret tranche of additional documents, that this is everything. They said that any claims that the DOJ is working to protect the president is not true. We know that in this new trove of documents, which we are still reviewing, there are a number of them, is that they have decided to redact every single woman. This is a departure from something that we saw in the first trove of documents. There were women who were apparently not victims, who were not redacted. They then, you'll remember, there were some mistakes. They had to go back and remove some documents because they needed to redact them because there were concerns that they were releasing identities of victims. So this time they've decided to just redact everybody. And the one really notable thing there is that they are also redacting men if the men's presence in a photo or a video or anything otherwise makes it impossible to redact the identity of the woman. And so there is a possibility that we could see some men redacted in this new drop. But we also know that Todd Blanche is saying that there are probably not any new men who would be convicted of wrongdoing here, and that if they do discover any, they would, of course, prosecute them. But again, we are still going through these documents. It is a very large volume of documents, 3 million. This will take our team some time, but as soon as we have anything reportable, we'll bring it right to you. Ariel?
Thanks so much, Fallon. I know you'll stick around for that. Lisa, we now have our senior legal reporter, Lisa Rubin, with us. Lisa, Blanche was adamant, as Fallon mentioned, that the DOJ is not protecting President Trump. I don't know if we have the sound that we can play there of him talking about this. We have it? Okay. In the meantime, it was
or not
okay. We have it.
Anybody. I mean, I think that there's a hunger or a thirst for information that I do not think will be satisfied by the review of these documents.
So essentially alluding to the fact that no matter what's released at this point, it's not going to satiate those out there that just want to see names, they want to see photos, they want to see all of this. What do you make of Blanche's comments specifically when it comes to the president and what we may or may not see here?
I don't think that's a fair comment, and I'm going to try and be measured in my words, Ariel, because as I was discussing during our last hour with Ana Cabrera, the very existence of the Epstein Files Transparency Act is a product of a reversal by the Department of Justice. Trump came into office aligned with a whole movement of people that believed that there was a massive conspiracy around Jeffrey Epstein and the suppression of evidence and information about his sex trafficking ring. And they encouraged those voices. They told those voices that they would be listened to, and they promised that files related to Jeffrey Epstein would be released. And indeed, when they came into office, they initiated a process of reviewing these documents. They brought in people from the FBI and people from the National Security Division at the Department of Justice. We know this because multiple publications reported on this rampantly throughout the spring. And then sometime in or around May, Deputy Attorney General Blanche and others told the president about instances in which his name had come up and those of people close to him had come up. And somehow that resulted in a memo unsigned in July of last year, where the FBI and the Department of Justice essentially told us there's nothing more to see here. We don't believe it's in the public interest for us to release anymore. Somehow, in Mr. Blanche's mind, that's transmogrified into a we were legally not able to release anymore until the Epstein Files Transparency Act was put into place. That's also not true. They did need judicial permission to release some small modicum of what we're going to see, things that were grand jury materials or otherwise produced in discovery in the 2 criminal cases. But other than that, This is a situation largely of this administration's own making and a miscalculation politically by them of the hunger that they themselves stoked for more information about Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and the sex trafficking ring.
I did find that relatively notable that Blanche seemed almost annoyed that this topic had come to the forefront during this press conference and when he was pressed on it, and that it, just like you're saying, this came from members of the president's own orbit, from podcasters and the like.
Yeah, his peak was particularly upsetting to watch because it came out in response to a question about the survivors' frustration. And Mr. Blanche seemed to say, I am just as frustrated as they are, almost justifying that he was more frustrated with more of a right to be frustrated. He is not equally situated here. I appreciate that professionally, this must have been quite an ordeal for him and others at the Department of Justice. And I also appreciate his point that there are some conflicting goals embedded in the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Produce them immediately and also ensure that all victim identifying information is redacted. Those are two things that are hard to meet at the same time. And yet, he is not similarly situated to the survivors. Their request for justice, their demand for information is one that he could have accommodated much earlier and without a congressional enactment.
Okay, so Dave, speaking of the survivors, Blanche made it clear that there were redactions here, as Fallon reported. There were redactions of women who may have been survivors, victims of Jeffrey Epstein, other than Ghislaine Maxwell. She will appear in some of these documents. No images of men will be shown that would otherwise compromise the survivors, but no images of men will also be redacted in the release here. What do you make of all of this and how the DOJ is handling it?
The big question for a lot of people is, where are the co-conspirators? Those names are the ones that everyone wants. And until we get those names, people are going to be dissatisfied. Remember, we were supposed to get an Epstein client list. There was never an Epstein client list, but there are names of co-conspirators in the files. Will we see those? So far, we have seen all those names redacted, except for Jean-Luc Brunel, who died of suicide, Ghislaine Maxwell, who we all know had been convicted, so you can release her name, and Leslie Wexner. And we don't know why Leslie Wexner's name was unredacted while all the other alleged co-conspirators were redacted. So there seems to be, up to this point, no rhyme or reason why some names are there, others are not, why some pages are entirely redacted, all black all over the pages, while some are just pinpoint redactions. So hopefully we can have a more consistent approach now.
Are you surprised that there are 6 million documents that are just now coming into focus, that the DOJ has acted surprised that they're just now discovering this tranche of documents?
Yes, I wonder about the organization of all this. You remember they discovered 1 million+ documents that came from the Southern District of New York that were supposed to be transferred over to Maine Justice. So, these are all questions out there, and that's why we're right to ask Todd Blanche and others, why the slow roll? Are they trying to cover something up? And now he's out there saying, absolutely not. We're not trying to protect the boss here. We're just going to be releasing them as soon as we're practically able to, because they had manpower issues. But you can see why people are not giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Peter, Blanche said any member of Congress who has issues with what they're going to see today can take these unredacted files and go to the Department of Justice and ask questions, can get more information. What will you be watching for as far as how lawmakers approach what they see from the DOJ at this point?
Well, we'll see if any of them actually take them up on that. I've seen a number of occasions where members of Congress have been asked or offered the opportunity to look at documents, and then they don't actually take it up. They'd rather just talk about it without doing the homework. But, what's fascinating here, as Dave was just talking about, was the sort of the mistrust, I think, of this Justice Department and this administration on this issue, because, in fact, as Lisa said, they could have done this a lot earlier. You have these people, including the President of the United States, who have fomented the idea that there was something here, a conspiracy, until they got into office, and suddenly they were the ones responsible for it. Todd Blanche said that just now that they had originally identified 6 million documents for this release, and then decided really it's only 3 million. That the the 6 million was an example of over collecting, and he's decided that they've decided that really only 3 million are actually responsive to the law that Congress passed. Okay, that may be the case. We don't know because we're not in there. But let me ask you this. What would Donald Trump, who was not president, say about that? What he would say about that is, aha, there's something in secret in those 3 million pages that are not releasing. He would, because that's the kind of thing he often did. And now he's on the other side of that equation, asking people to trust him when he would not have trusted the Justice Department had he not been the president.
Peter, what do you make of the fact that Blanche is the face of this and Pam Bondi is nowhere to be seen at this moment?
Yeah, fascinating, right? She was not the one there taking questions today. Obviously, that indicates some sort of, continuing friction with her from the White House. They have not been happy with the way she's handled this. The president does trust Todd Blanche. Todd Blanche, of course, had been his personal attorney. And that's why when Todd Blanche says, oh, the White House has nothing to do with this, it's a little hard because, in fact, he is somebody who literally worked for Donald Trump as his personal lawyer and was installed as a deputy attorney general because the president wanted somebody who was loyal in there. And so whether or not the White House was directly involved in the specific redactions or the specific decision making about this, President Trump knew he had somebody in Todd Blanche as the deputy attorney general that he trusted. And that's why I think a lot of people out there who are looking for, a neutral handling of this are not satisfied.